Well, we've seen a lot in Star Trek so far, but I don't know if I've seen anything as disturbing and hideous as that face that we saw in this episode.
Well, I don't know if I can agree. I mean, how can you say that about Jonathan Frakes?
Shields up. Go to red alert.
Fire torpedoes.
A surprise attack hurls the Enterprise into a mysterious void.
Sensors show nothing out there.
But a sinister alien traps the crew in a deadly experiment.
We will fight you.
It's a desperate battle for survival.
Initiate auto-destruct sequence.
On the next exciting episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
This has honestly one of my favorite openings of an episode that we've watched in the franchise. I loved No Captain's Log. Just starts with Picard worriedly walking into the bridge.
You're worried about Worf or Commander Riker?
Both.
And then it cuts right to them in the middle of this like jungle forest set with Riker all dirt all over his face. And they just get to have this 2-on-2 fight with these two random characters.
Yes, they fought a Koopa Trooper and Skeletor. The Koopa Trooper guy looked pretty sick, but then they have a close-up shot of the skull mask. I'm like, It's always nice for a cool little holodeck bait and switch. Like, it's the holodeck. Picard being so worried about him, it's kind of like, just like a hook to fool us, but also like, as it's paid off later, testing Worf per se, making sure Worf doesn't lose his cool.
The exercise is over!
Why do they need to like test Worf, especially in season 1? Like, I think Picard had like all his hope. Worf's my guy. Like, he trusted him. Like, he even trusted Worf to go with like the 3 Klingons. And like, oh yeah, it's fine. But like here, it's like, oh, I'm worried about him. It's like,
I like the little added note into Worf's character, diving a little bit more into Klingon culture and how Klingons act. I like to be able to tell the differences between humans and other races that just look humanoid. So Klingons are a completely different race than humans. It would make sense that they have stuff about them that's different genetically. So Worf having to deal with his anger more than a human would have to, and deal with his aggressiveness. I like to see that play out a little bit. I wonder how much they'll go into that in the show, but I did like it.
okay.
But that whole 2-on-2 fight in the beginning was awesome. I did start to kind of think like this is probably, maybe not specifically in the holodeck, but this is some type of exercise because it's like literally Skeletor comes out.
Yeah, but like Jonathan Frakes, he had dirt all over his face, which made me think like, okay, they really make it trying to sell us that it's a physical location and a pretty good fight scene.
Oh yeah.
And like, I guess we should have known it was a holodeck thing because at one point, like Worf is just fighting by himself. Riker is just watching him. I'm like,
Yeah.
So at first I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's a Klingon thing. Don't help me while I fight. Then it's like, oh, it's a holodeck thing. I don't think they're actually in danger. But based on previous holodeck experiences, I wouldn't trust it.
And then that was it. That was the cold open of the episode. No huge plot hook or even big hint of what was going to happen. And I found that very refreshing. I like when stuff is different. No captain's log, no hook to the episode. Just here's a scene like with some nice little notes about the characters. And then, okay, now we'll get into the episode. And then obviously eventually there's going to be the plot hook. But yeah, I don't like it every time, but I like that it's switched up sometimes.
Yeah, I can totally picture this episode, the hook being just stuck in that void.
So then we do eventually get into what ends up being the plot of the episode, where the Enterprise approaches just big, cloudy, black hole void in space. We've seen stuff like this before. Data doesn't have any readings on his screen. Counselor Troy is asked, and she doesn't sense anything. And then next thing you know, they're sucked into it. It's like a classic Star Trek, like, oh, this weird situation.
They asked Data to enhance into this thing, right?
Increase by 1,000, Mr. Data. It does know how to do these things, doesn't it?
Screw you. You know what I mean?
So that's interesting. So you're definitely taking more of a defensive of Data kind of reaction.
Well, yeah, it's not like episode 1 season TOS, like all of them were there right away.
Yeah.
We've had an entire season with Data, all this stupid, quirky little like, oh, Beaver, whatever, all that stuff. And then for this new person to come along and go like, you know what I mean? Like, especially with no one ever being that critical of him. I mean, they were like, all right, Data, enough, when he would start to go on, tangents about nothing. But to straight up be like, like that, it's like, hey, I've been here longer than you have.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like the show is at its weakest when it tries to do some type of copy of TOS and it just comes off as not as good. I think this is an example where it's like, oh, we have to introduce a female Bones dynamic where she has a weird relationship with the different member of the crew, except they don't have a Vulcan, so it's Data. Oh, let's and like maybe if they keep building on it, they'll get to a point where it's nice and kind of like friendly back and forth, like Bones and Spock. But it's definitely not there. And also, Data as a character, not Brent Spiner, but Data as a character doesn't really have like the wit to go back and forth like Spock did.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's gonna be tough.
Yeah, do it with Troy or something. Like have her fascinated with this a creature that can like feel emotion. You know, it's like
Had the two women on the crew fight each other. Yeah, how cliche.
Forgive me again. Your service record says that you are alive. I must accept that.
well, I guess one shot I just have to mention. I think it's already when the whole like zooms into them, and there's this really neat shot where it's like it shows Picard, but like out of focus in frame is like Riker's hand like twitching, and then like it slowly goes up him. Every now and then, one of these just classic TV episodes where it's like just get stuff out, get stuff out. There is stuff where it's like, oh, that looks cool.
The director was Winrich Colby. Pretty sure that's a first timer, and I was pretty impressed by the direction. There was that shot. There was a lot of cool like wrap around the breach shots for an episode where not much action's going on besides the opening. It did need kind of a directorial hand, and I thought the director delivered here.
Yeah, even like the opening scene, back to it, just that opening shot of Picard walking in just felt very odd and eerie.
Romulans almost show up, but not really. I guess it was just like an illusion of a Romulan ship, but I was surprised we even saw the ship. I was like, oh wow, and then they just blow it up right away.
So they show us them at the end of last season, and are they going to start the whole teasing process over again here?
Oh yeah, they keep teasing, and then they show up with the season 2 finale. We're back again.
We're back again. Can you believe it?
And then the USS Yamato shows up, which is supposed to be their sister ship, but they can't get a hold of anybody. There's no signs of life, and they beam Riker and Worf over to the ship. I think this is one of the strongest parts of the episode.
I heard you screaming. I was coming to help.
You heard me? I heard you.
Kind of sets some nice creepy vibes.
Yes, I love the mind games here, especially when we don't know. We're with our characters here. We don't know what's going on. There's very cool trick camera shots with like the two bridges, like a video game screen, like going in and coming out the other. All that stuff, and then kind of paying off what happened earlier with Riker saying Eddie's lieutenant during like the holodeck scene.
What? Ease, Lieutenant. At ease.
Weird that they paid that off in the middle, and then like the rest of the episode doesn't really have much to do with them. But they paid it off. I'm glad they did it.
They did something,
Instead of just fun scene in the beginning and that's it.
But yeah, I thought these two on this other ship was probably my favorite part of the episode.
Oh, yeah.
I loved all the creative stuff on there. Again, the creative direction. And even though it doesn't necessarily amount to anything, like even when we find out what's going on, it doesn't like fully go into explain it. It was just a nice little sequence, away from the rest of the crew until eventually they're able to beam them back right as that ship disappears. I think that's kind of when Nagilum shows up.
Captain, look.
Why are you so alarmed when I've gone to such trouble to look just like you?
It looks terrible. It looks just god awful, and it's like almost like self-aware meta where it's like, what? I try to make my appearance, like you or whatever. It's like, what's wrong? It's just like this horrible CGI job. Kind of credit to like, yeah, we know this is gonna look bad. So I don't know if that was the intention, but I think it works either way. And once again, another, I wouldn't say it's a godlike entity, but another like not testing humanity, but like more of experimenting on humanity, like a little different.
I felt it was too similar to Q and like doesn't have the charisma of John DeLance or anything. Like this creature, oh, I'm just here to test humanity and see what you guys are all about. It's like, okay, well, we kind of already saw this with like your main villain of what you've introduced in TNG with Q. Like just do a Q episode if that's what you want to do. Like, I don't know. I know it's a general thing, so like Q isn't the only species in the universe that's going to want to test humans, but I just feel like we're seeing the same thematic thing over and over again.
To understand death, I must amass information on every aspect of it.
But this thing like genuinely didn't know anything about them, I
True.
feel like. But I feel like Q is like aware of them and like wants to push them to be better.
Yeah,
a little bit.
he's aware of the history.
Yeah. I mean, so is this thing as well. Like it said all their names, so it was able to like try to trick them. But it was only for like the purpose of learning, not to like help. It was just like, oh, let me just, play around here with these things, which, in my opinion, leads to some neat scenes. Picard and the fake Troy and Data.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that scene was great.
It is wrong of you to force us.
It is wrong.
Data asks like what death is. I'm like, Data should know what death is. I mean, he's not a moron. And then Picard's like, wait a second. And then finding out it wasn't really them. I'm like, oh, it's good.
Computer, locate Commander Data for me.
Commander Data is on the bridge.
It was a good twist there with it not being really them, but I also did like the kind of digging into Picard as a character and his beliefs, like getting straight up asked, like, do you believe in God or are you an atheist, essentially, and his answer of kind of like, well, I think there's something, like there has to be a reason we're all here, I just don't think it's like a religious God that humans have thought of. I like that they didn't give like a firm answer of like, oh, well, this is exactly what I believe. He was also just, he was kind of just like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think there's something, but I don't know. And I liked being able to see that side of him.
Listen, with all the stuff that we've experienced,
Yeah.
like TOS, this show, it's like whatever's on the other side, it has to be like even more. So it's like, oh, that's an interesting theory. They initiate the self-destruct sequence.
Initiate auto-destruct sequence.
Does Riker, William T, concur?
I do.
And they go back up to the bridge, and like they're like, okay, can we turn this off now? And Picard's like, I don't know, not yet, because it could still be an illusion. And that whole like tenseness, like, is this even happening?
Could all be part of the illusion.
Because I thought for a second they were just going to do a whole like none of this happened, which I'm glad they didn't. But it made me think like, oh, what if like from the minute they went in, none of this matters.
I liked the callback to what we've set up previously in the series, where he's like, computer, where is Data? He's on the bridge, setting up that you can ask where people are.
That's right.
And using that in this scene. And then after Picard experienced that, the ship is already in self-destruct mode. Now he doesn't know what to believe. When he comes out onto the bridge, and they're like, oh, hey, we're out of it. He doesn't even believe it. He's like, no, keep the self-destruct to the very last second. And then they cancel it. And I love that little moment between Riker and Wesley.
He sure held that bluff to the last second, didn't he, sir?
Was he bluffing?
They truly don't know. They think he could, would have blown up the whole ship. But that makes me ask, then what did make him, like, realize that they were actually out of it? I wonder, like, was he really just waiting that last second? Like, was he bluffing, do you think? Or do you think he just somehow had a change of heart rate at the end?
I don't know, Picard, he's like an interesting cat. Like, he's, like, also one of my favorite scenes is when Riker comes back from, like, the other ship all pissed off. Like, oh, enough of all these games. And he's saying that right to Picard's face, and I thought Picard was going to be like, easy number one. But, like, he, like, turns and smiles. Like, it makes you wonder. Because he's so, like, it's so interesting.
He lets out these glimpses of, like, he's actually someone else. He just doesn't let that hard exterior fall very often.
It's like, I still don't know who he is. Like a complex character. Like, what is he thinking? He might have let the ship blow up. I don't know. As more and more goes on, I'm like, I don't really know this person.
And then the Nagilum shows up one more time on Picard's computer screen, once again hideous, and kind of expositionally tries to explain what his whole point was, and Picard's just like, okay.
Would you like me to share some of my conclusions?
Not interested.
Oh, of course you are.
It seems like he's talking directly to Picard, but he's talking about humanity. You are too quick, brash, blah, blah, blah. But I feel like he should have given Picard a compliment there, but not you. There's hope for you yet or something, but he's like, no, you all suck. Bye.
Yeah.
And Picard's like, okay.
It's amazing you've survived.
Not that we need this thing's respect, but I feel like something from that entity where it's like, you're okay. You know what I mean?
Because otherwise, what's the point?
Because the thing's like, oh, I got all my research. I'm fine. Well, I got all what I needed to. It's like, okay.
And Ensign, if you encounter any holes, steer clear.
I do think it's a big improvement over the first episode of the season. I think it's a much better episode. I think that the tension was really great with the whole self-destruct part of it and actually making me close to believe that something could happen with the Enterprise blowing up. In terms of, quote-unquote, an episode where nothing really happens, this is like a good example of it, where you can actually keep me still interested and not bored when there's like not a ton of action and it's just them on the Enterprise and that's it. So, gotta give it props for that. Still wouldn't say this is like one of my favorite episodes or anything. I have no real interest in revisiting it. I thought there was some cool stuff. That's about it.
Yeah. That's my answer.
Well, let's see if the patrons are as indifferent as us. On this episode, we're going to jump into our patron takes. We ask our patrons to let us know what they think of the episode, as well as ask us questions about how we feel about it, make predictions of how we're going to react to it, and so on. We read a few of them here for the video, but there's a whole bunch of them over on our Patreon, so you can go check those out. This one's from Adam. He said, "Did Kirk forget to file his log in immunity syndrome? Because this crew has never heard about a hole in space appearing before." And you brought this up while watching the episode that you were like, how do they not know about this? Like, this is something that they came across not only in TOS multiple times, but you would just think that Starfleet and other ships would have come across this. And I guess you just had to kind of suspend your disbelief for that.
Yeah, and the amount of times like all these crew members just pull random events out of their ass all the time, like, oh, this reminds me of. It's like, why do you just know that in the back of your head and you just happen to run it? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that none of them, it's like, this must happen every week to different ships at all times, to the point where like people don't even think about it anymore, or this is only, I don't know, whatever.
But yeah, I definitely agree with what Adam is saying. You kind of have to let the show, when it wants to reference something that's happened before, allow it, and then you kind of have to forget it for everything else, because otherwise you could say that out probably every episode. Like, oh, well, didn't they hear about this? Didn't they hear about this? And as we go on, that's only going to be more and more, right? With future shows, it's like even more episodes and stuff to reference.
Yeah, and like even tools they've introduced or just different aspects where it's never brought up again. That every show has that. Okay, this one's from Psynock the Hodgehog. God damn it! First redshirt death of the season. Woo! Space is a scary place. Nice to see a horror episode. I don't know if I'd call this a horror episode per se. I mean, elements of like what is going on, or like cool little, like misdirection with the multiple bridges, but I wouldn't call it like
That moment when Riker and Worf went to the other ship, it like bumped up against being horror. It was like almost horror.
Yeah.
And it didn't really jump full in. The death he's talking about is Haskell, who was played by Charles Douglas, and we didn't talk about him at all. Was literally put in there just to die, and that's just one of my pet peeves. Like, Wesley was sitting there. Wesley just disappears. Here's Haskell. We give him a name and then kill him. And then Wesley's back.
They're teasing it. They're doing that to us on purpose. It's like, oh, we killed someone who sat in Wesley's chair, but Wesley's back. Oh, if only he was there for that split second of time. Screw you guys.
Yeah, and the death was fine. It was a little bit shocking, I guess. Like, I didn't see it coming, so it was good in that respect. R.I.P. Haskell, I guess.
Yeah. Guy's tough because he was still breathing after he died.
Here's one from Andy. This is an underrated episode. Does a fantastic job of creating the sense of unease in both the viewer and the characters. At its core, there's a very classic Trek discussion to be had. I have no doubt you'll both love this one. Well, overestimated a little bit. I think you liked it more than me, but I still liked it.
Yeah, I definitely liked it. I wouldn't say I loved it. Yeah, it's one of those where it's like I'm struggling to say more about it, and that always is worrisome to me, I guess. I don't know.
Like, it doesn't spark that much discussion.
Yeah, it doesn't really spark that much. Like, it is what it is.
I do think the unease that it creates is like the biggest praise I can give it. The fact that it made me feel the tension that I so often don't feel in these high stakes plots. At this point, blowing up the Enterprise is becoming like a trope, but in this episode, actually doing it a little bit believably is definitely, I think, the best part of it.
This one's from Gregory. A bit of headcanon here, but Worf talks about an old Klingon legend of a gigantic black space creature which was said to devour entire vessels. I always took this to mean the old Doomsday Machine from TOS. Yeah, and I brought up the Doomsday Machine. It does make sense. If those... I would definitely make that headcanon, that this thing just went around and devoured old things, and it's an old folks' tale. I believe it. I mean, there's only so much I think it'd eat.
I mean, that's what's great about headcanon, right? There's nothing to dispute it. If it makes sense to you, it's like, all right, cool.
Gene can't come back and say that's not true, so... From Andreas, did Picard bluff or not? This is one of those where it's like, I don't want to know. I think it's better that we just wonder. Like, I don't want a direct answer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, ambiguous ending movies or whatever, where it's like, oh, is so-and-so this? And it's like, don't need to know.
Don't give me the answer.
I'd rather not know the answer. And we've talked about this, like, Kubrick talking about 2001, like, oh, what happened in 2001? Oh, you tell me.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's up to us to think. It's our headcanon. Did he bluff or not? I don't know. I don't know. I don't want the show to tell me. I just want to ponder, it's like, I want to be fascinated by these characters and not have direct answers about their thoughts, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. do we actually like Star Trek or not? It's up to you to decide.